A week of unrest on the streets of France. The killing of a teenager at the hands of police sparked massive destructive riots across the country and has reignited a debate on racial inequality. But will leaders see this as an opportunity for change? I'm Melinda Nusofora, and today's newsmaker is the French protests. Last Tuesday, Nahel M, the son of Algerian and Moroccan parents, was shot dead by a policeman in France. It started an uprising in the predominantly lower socio-economic suburbs of Paris and quickly escalated into a broader outpouring of frustration and anger towards the state. For a week, thousands have taken to the streets. Angry rioters have torched cars, looted stores and targeted public buildings, with flashpoints in cities including Paris, Strasbourg, Marseille and Nice.
The person who was killed was a minor, and that is why more minors are coming into the movement. And we support this movement because what is going on is unfair. There are police.
The young man left us for nothing. We are not saying we are not contradicting the state. We are not contradicting the legal or police procedure. Yes, he was driving a car without a license. He tried to flee, but he should not be killed. That's all. They shouldn't have fired.
In just one of many incidents across the country, rioters went as far as to ram a burning car into a mayor's home in Paris while his wife and children were asleep inside. So far, more than 3,000 people have been arrested in the past week. Many of them are teenagers or young adults. On Sunday, Nahel's grandmother said the rioters were using his death as an excuse to cause havoc and said the family wanted calm.
I blame the police officer who killed my grandson. That's all I'm angry with. We have the police, and lucky for us that we have the police. And the people who are breaking things, I tell them, stop it, stop it. They're doing this with Nahel as a pretext. No, people should stop. They should stop. They should not break store windows. They should not ransack schools.
Meanwhile, plenty of civilians have also had enough, saying they will be worse off after the protests.
The problem is that we live there. We grew up there. They burn our own homes. In the end, we are not winners in this story.
This is where allowing yourself to break, to burn, is not. It is not what will sow or bring back someone who has died. Precisely, we must respect his soul.
We are afraid to go out in the evening, even to drink coffee, as it's so dangerous now. People are out there until 2 a.m., 3 a.m.
The riots are considered to be the worst crisis for French President Emmanuel Macron since the yellow vest protests over fuel prices gripped France in 2018. But it hasn't prompted the same kind of government soul-searching on race which followed similar incidents in other Western countries. Instead, the French government points to underprivilege in low-income urban neighbourhoods and juvenile delinquency. It reflects the state's belief that citizens are united under a single French identity, regardless of race or ethnicity. Party leaders met on Monday to discuss a way forward, while the Prime Minister says the priority now is to restore Republican order. The far-right MP for the National Rally Party, Sébastien Chenu, says government policies are to blame for the riots.
This situation is not the result of chance. It's a consequence of the last 30 years of policies in our country, or maybe more. Policies on security, policies on immigration, the city's policies. It's a failure, and today, Madame Bon is not only co-responsible, but her government is in the situation that we find ourselves and our country in.
So what's at the root of the unrest, and is police reform needed? We have an expert panel joining us today from London. Jacques Renaud is the Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute. And from Paris, we have Yasser Louati. He's a political analyst and the head of the Justice and Liberties for All Committee. Also in Paris and completing our panel is Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, a French columnist for The Telegraph. Thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. I want to start with you, Anne-Elisabeth, and pose this point. France's police force has been described by some analysts, by some protesters, as a hotbed for racism and brutality. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know that I'm supposed to answer for this, but the French police has certainly perpetrated brutalities. There's a huge difference between calling about something a hotbed or something systemic. And normally there are sanctions for that. And there ought to be no impunity, but there are examples of racism, there are examples of brutality. I should imagine, especially in terms of brutality, that they come from weakness and mostly fear. You have to realize that the police are often overrun, and I follow the Twitter accounts of policemen, and I have since the Yellow Vest movement. And they are mostly scared. They're terrified. They can be surrounded. People attack them with weapons of war. Recently, I was talking with a policeman. He said people now use shotguns. They use mortars against us. And it's not, we are supposedly trained to react with this calmly, but sometimes you're surrounded and you're really scared. It doesn't excuse it, but it might, questions might be asked to the Home Office in France, which is less competent now than it has been under other presidents like Jacques Chirac, like Nicolas Sarkozy, who had experience of police work. Emmanuel Macron not only doesn't know anything about policing, but he doesn't have people who know about this, such as Charles Pasqua was for President Chirac, for instance, who can sort of explain things, reassure the police so that the police themselves feel that they're more listened to.
Jacques, there have been 13 police killings in the last year, and most of the victims, or a large number of those victims, have been Black or of Arab descent. Do you believe the police force has a racism problem?
There is a racism problem in the French police force, as there is a racism problem in French society. I remember one union representative of the police is unionized at 95%, saying that the French police mirrors French society. And but as a policeman, you should be educated, even if you have racist tendencies, it should be removed from you in some way. They have a responsibility to represent the state. They have to be neutral, and they have to be upstanding. And unfortunately, the way the police behaves, especially towards young people with a different ethnic origin, either Black or Arabic, tend not to be very correct. They would not say vous, they say tu. They insult them very often. They accuse them, they search them all the time. That's one of the problems. The young people, and I know I've got a mixed race son, and I know he tells me he doesn't do anything right, but in a quiet town in France, he's arrested and stopped more often than his white friends. Last time, there were he was with two white friends. They asked for their papers. He always carries his papers. And they only searched him. They did not search his two white friends. They searched his bag. They searched his pockets. He did not have anything. But he knows that he's integrated it. And I can imagine that in the suburbs, where I don't live, where the situation is tense, there's suspicion of drug dealing and all that, it is true, it's a very violent environment, that eventually it gets to people. It's too much. Why do they go the time? That's one thing that maybe should be stopped. And there's been the issue before. Nicolas Sarkozy, who you said was a great connoisseur of the police, is the one who put an end to what we call police de proximité, where you would have policemen on the ground, dialoguing, trying to find the information, having a peaceful relation with local inhabitants. He said, no,
we will come to discussions about possible police reforms in a moment, but I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I'm just going to move it on to Yasser for some response. Do you think that the protesters have anything to answer for with regards to the escalation in the violence and the brutality that we've been seeing on the streets? We heard from Anne Elizabeth saying that the police feel threatened, and so perhaps that's why they are responding with force. We've seen night after night the escalation from what were protests about racism and perhaps very justified concerns to looting and vandalism. So do the protesters themselves have something to answer for?
Well, it's always problematic to come downstream of a problem and then look at the symptoms and describe them as the root causes. The root cause is racism and police brutality. We shouldn't forget, and this is something that tends to be forgotten in mainstream politics, the national police, I mean the centralized police as we know it today, not the idea of a police, but an organized, centralized structure, was born on the 23rd of April, 1941. Through a decree signed by Maréchal Pétain. This is not something we should forget. So from the genesis of the police, we already have a problem with that. Yes, your God, you can call him. Now, the issue that lies downstream of this problem is that we have never seen the police being purged from the racist elements after the liberation of France. We saw it after the deportation of Jews in 1942. The police was at the head of it. 1961, we have the killing of Algerians, and then this violence perpetuates itself. Now, of course, the dimension has changed. When we speak of the interactions between the police and these populations, according to the ombudsman, when you are black and Arab, and especially young, you are 20 times more likely of being stopped by the police. You factor in the fact that the French police is the deadliest police force on continental Europe. As said earlier, more than a dozen have been killed in the past year alone, whereas in Germany, for example, only one person was killed. But I'm going to go alongside what has been said right before me by Mr. Roland. The recruitment of the police is already problematic. In order to fill the ranks, the grades have been lowered, which means the government or the state has been less selective. In 2012, for example, only 1 out of 50 candidates would make it. Now it's 1 out of 5. The admission grade has been dropped to 8 out of 20. And to make things even worse, again, to speak about how people should be trained and properly educated and armed to deal with these situations, the training of the police went from 12 to 8 months. And why people are scared from the police? Ziad and Bouna in 2005 ran away from the police, though they hadn't done anything wrong. And this is a reminder that when you are black and Arab, you carry this idea with you that you can be stopped at any time, you can be disrespected and even face violence. And in the case of Nahel, deadly violence. We have to remember, Nahel was shot down point blank in the heart, while the police officer faced no danger. And he lied when he was initially asked, and this does not help. The fact that he lied, and thank God there was a video to show that that Nahel was shot down. And just to finish on this, just one last point, I'm going to stop. The third occupant of the vehicle, told, and now he's being interrogated by the police, he shared his version of the story. He said Nahel had been knocked out by the policeman with his gun, and he was losing consciousness. And by fainting, he released the brakes of an automatic car, and then the car moved forward. And that's when the police officer shot him. My question is, who armed the policeman and who trained him to believe he could shoot down an unarmed teenager and potentially get away with it?
And this brings us to the point that, Anne Elizabeth, a lot of people have been discussing, and this is Article 435-1 of the Penal Code in France that permits police to shoot on 5 instances where they believe that there is a risk, and that includes at traffic stops. Do you think that law, that article of the Penal Code 435-1 is too vague? Is it giving police impunity to fire their weapons at will?
Well, first of all, I would like to pass what Yasser said, because he said very true things, and he said some things that frankly have nothing to do with the part of the police. To try and cast the French police, which has existed before 1942, into the form of something that was created by the collaborationists with the Nazi occupier of France is really, it is an argument that has nothing to do with this. It's dishonest. It's got nothing to do. The police was indeed purged, but it doesn't even matter. I mean, we are talking about young
It
policemen
wasn't, no,
today who
no,
are about
it
30.
wasn't a purge.
Look,
It wasn't a purge. Madam,
Let's move.
was
Let's
in the
continue
police
to
I would
move
like
on.
to be able to
Yasser, if
finish
you
this-
would just
and he
I would
leave,
like not to
if
be
you would leave
interrupted.
Yasser,
I would like
please,
to
if you
not-
would leave Anne-Elizabeth to answer the
like-
question with regards to police shooting with impunity.
No. I want to finish my sentence because really I don't want to be interrupted. I did not interrupt Yasser when he was speaking. I will not. Women are always interrupted in those panels, and I do not want to be interrupted. I
Oh,
would like
yeah. Crimea River. Yeah.
Of course.
It's a man-women thing.
Yasser,
Yes.
please
Carry
allow
on.
Anne-Elizabeth to make her point, and then we'll continue.
And that means that Yasser, I am sorry to say, is talking in various things. Some things are very true. It is difficult to recruit policemen. It is also very difficult to recruit teachers. And the level of training of teachers in France has gone down for the same reasons that it is that these are difficult jobs that are badly paid in the French civil service. And that this sort of thing means that recruitment is more difficult. Does bad recruitment and bad training create the situations in which you have police brutality? That is perfectly true. That is perfectly true. I agree on this. I will not have the French police tainted by associations with the collaboration more than 70 years ago. And I think that point was well made. As for the article that enables the police to shoot, I know what it was responding to. I would agree to some extent. To some extent only. I would agree to some extent that it opens a loophole in which the policeman can find himself or herself induced to act in sort of excessive way. But the reason why this was possible is that we have talked about people killed by the police, and every single one of that person killed by the police should not have been killed by the police, because that would be an extrajudicial execution. It is not acceptable. But you have more policemen who are killed in various incidents, 16 last year. So it is still not comparable with what happened in countries like America, where 1,200 people were killed by the police, but it is far too many, and that is a problem that has to be examined by the French legislator. Now, this degenerated into a difficult conversation, and not every argument can be heard, and I would like this to be calmer afterwards, but I will not be shut up.
And I'm going to just open the floor to Jacques for a moment before, I know, Yasser, you want to respond, but Jacques, I want to bring you back into our discussion with regards to that Article 435-1. There is broad discussion that it is too vague, that it doesn't put serious and teachable restrictions on police so that they are adhering to the rules of law in a very direct way. What do you think about that?
I don't know whether it is about the formulation of the law, which is not clear enough, but even though it says that this law aligned the powers of the police on those of the gendarmerie. And they said that when the threat, they can respond by shooting in a proportionate way, and only if there's an absolute necessity, i.e., if the life of the policeman or of the public is in danger. That's the same rule as the gendarme. And I'll just give you two figures. Between 2002 and 2017, there were 17 shootings by policemen. Since 2017, we've had 32 shootings by policemen, while the number of shootings by gendarmes has not increased at all, has remained the same. So to me, it seems to highlight the lack of training, the lack of control of some policemen. And it is true, they've highlighted the fact that handing a gun is not an easy thing to do. It appears from the outside a very simple thing to do. No, you need a lot of experience, a lot of training. And the amount of training on shooting range is, I can't remember the figures exactly, but it's minimal. So you give guns to people who are not really able to handle them properly, and you have incidents just as this one. So changing the law, I don't know whether that will make a big difference. It's just because the law clearly states how it has to be applied. Unfortunately, it is very often not applied in a proper way. We've seen other incidents like that. I remember the Pont-Neuf incident that was shocking too. It did not lead to any prosecution towards the policeman, but it was shocking from an outside point of view. So and the ability to shoot right in the legs, on the cars, on the tires of the car, but not in the head of the passenger, as was the case in the Pont Neuf.
Indeed, indeed. Yes, I want to bring you back in here and ask you, we've discussed the training, obviously, that is an issue. What about oversight? Do you believe that the French police needs a new independent watchdog to look over these sorts of issues?
First, a clarification that the number one cause of death for policemen and women in France is suicide. It was about 45 per year between 93 and 2020. It jumped to 59 in 2019. So the working conditions and the way hierarchy treats policemen and women is far more responsible for the deaths of police officers than the really difficult conditions. I mean, when I go to a police station, I tell them, when is the heat going to come on, or the air conditioning? So they are working in bad conditions, and that's a fact. When it comes to supervision of the police, we have the IGPN, the General Inspection of the National Police, that is composed of former policemen and women. We do need to open this institution to include people from civil society, legal experts, sociologists, etc., in order to sharpen this supervision, in order to make sure that the IGPN does its proper work of getting the police rid of all the the famous bad apples. We have not seen that so far. As for the Article 435-1, it's very important to know that this was passed in 2017 under the François Hollande government, Bernard Cazeneuve being at the Minister of Interior, under pressure and lobbying from the main unions, Alliance Police being the most known one. But the words used in that piece of legislation of the Homeland Security Code are quite strict. They speak of when the police officer's life is in danger, and in case of absolute necessity. What happened is that the national police has adopted a loose interpretation of this Article 435-1, and that is why we see more deaths at the hand of the police using this article than you would see, for example, with the military police called Gendarmerie Nationale. As for reforming the police, it's going to be very, very difficult. The police is represented mainly by unions that are close to the hard right, if not the far right. And to give you an example of the kind of rhetoric they use in these times, instead of calling for appeasement, they said as the banlieue and the rest of France was experiencing uprisings, they talked about we are in the face of these barbaric hordes. We must impose our will. This is no time for union struggle, but a fight against undesirables. We are at war, and the government better take note. So with this kind of rhetoric, and you add to it, and maybe another minority union called France Police that praised the killing of Nahel, honestly, unless the government takes the matter seriously and acknowledges the past years of documented police brutality, documented racial profiling, and then say, how can we check and balance this police? Unfortunately, we are going to see more violence in the streets, and unfortunately, more Nahels being killed at their hands.
Anne-Elisabeth, Yasser there mentioned the government needs to take note. Do you think that this is going to have a domestic impact on the President, Emmanuel Macron?
I think the government needs to take note, and I'm in agreement with Nahel on the fact that the police not being trained well enough is more likely to perpetrate this. And I have, in the several articles that I've written for my paper on this, I've made a very sharp difference between the training of the gendarmerie, and the result is that you get better policing out of that, and the training of the police. And for those viewers of ours who do not know the difference, the national police is policing the cities, and the gendarmerie polices the countryside and the small towns. And they are also the body of policing force, military trained, from which elite regiments are taken for special forces, for special operations, sometimes even outside France when they are called to help. They helped even in Ukraine to identify the bodies in places like Izium and Bucha.
But as far as the president himself, is he Teflon in this, or is this going to impact him?
I don't think I don't think he is Teflon. And as I said, the real problem with Emmanuel Macron is that he has no knowledge of what policing is. And that means that has given his ministers, the current one, Gérald Darmanin, slightly better. But that means that essentially he is in the hands of the unions of policemen who are, I mean, the last union that Yasser described is a marginal and excessive and honestly should be, with the last words they used, should be really sort of put out of business.
Yes,
but the other two unions, mainstream unions, express themselves that way because they feel that there's nobody at the helm. And so far, Emmanuel Macron and his minister have not given him the sentiment that there was someone who would check them if they went into excesses.
Very interesting points from all of you. I'm sorry, unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you all very much for your contribution here on The Newsmakers. And thank you to our audience for watching. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Melinda Nusafora. See you next time.